Lead balloons.
It's the alchemy of
Unpopular opinions. So,
Whoops, I have somewhere to be. There's actually bourbon in this, so everyone knows.
those things are very complicated and
I don't know that I actually believe what I'm about to say.
spreading lies.
This critical culture that we live in.
Just to try to be an asshole.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to our episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. I've always kind of been attracted to and disturbed by, to be honest, the arguments of intellectual atheists. Today we're going to talk about one that really influenced you, Trent. But before we do, I want to ask you a question, put you on the spot. I don't know, what's your short answer to the question if someone's like, hey, dude, what is atheism? They call you an atheist. What does that mean?
I know. I mean, there's so many different definitions, really. So I don't know if I can say that this is a definition of atheism, but though if I use the word atheism, basically what I'm saying is atheism means that it describes a person who does not think that the arguments that exist for the existence of God are convincing. That really is all that it commits you to. It's not like a philosophical system as far as I see it, although we can disagree about this, and I think other people would suggest otherwise. But basically, plain and simple, it just simply means I don't think that the arguments for theism are convincing. Now, there could have been a word like deism to describe someone who doesn't believe that there's any kind of divine power. But atheist kind of describes somebody who not only doesn't think that there's a regular sort of generic divine power, but also somebody who doesn't believe in the arguments that are generally advanced by monotheism or even different polytheistic religions like Hinduism. So it's a little bit tricky because there's agnosticism and there's atheism. What are the differences? I think atheism has always sort of had more of a hard edge to it than agnosticism. Agnosticism is kind of a soft landing spot, where atheist kind of strikes me as more caustic, more confrontational. But I don't think that it needs to be connoted that way. I think that it simply just describes somebody who doesn't believe that there is a God. It is not. It's important also, Joel. This is important when things get more philosophical. It is not the positive affirmation that there is no God. That's not philosophically sustainable, because how could you ever plumb the depths of reality to prove that that was true? It simply says the arguments that are on offer for establishing the existence of a God are not compelling. Yeah. So they're not saying, I know for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of talking about how a lot of things kind of connotatively get hitched on to certain words. So we might hear the word liberal or conservative, and all of a sudden we start thinking, oh, that label means that they also believe X, Y, and Z, or they also have these kinds of attitudes. Whereas, atheism is the way you're kind of describe it. It's like someone who's non-Baskin Robbins. So they're like, they don't like Baskin Robbins, and that's all it really says. It doesn't really necessarily mean other things. Okay, so do you consider yourself an atheist?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah.
Did that take you a while to kind of like own that label?
No, I don't think at all. I don't think so. Because I didn't associate it with anything more than simply a response to the arguments that were made. Again, it doesn't commit. Atheists can be and have been all kinds of political persuasions, all kinds of people like different things. There's not a ton necessarily that joins atheists together.
Yeah, so but you pendulum swung, bro. You went to seminary and you were like working at a church and listening to like debates, and then all of a sudden you were agreeing with the person on the other side of the debate. Like, did that take you a while, or were you just like, no, man, I switched teams?
Oh, man, that's such a great question, because the way that I've answered it before is my turning from Christian to non-Christian. It was both a very gradual process, and it was also very sudden. And I think we'll probably get to this more in the podcast, but I'll just drop a little hint right here. Is one of the debates that I listened to, it may have been the very first debate that I listened to featuring Christopher Hitchens, was a major milestone, a major moment for me as I made that transition. It's just things just clicked. I think a couple things too. It's pretty clear for anybody who's listened to multiple episodes and listened to us talk that I'm still very much anchored to the Bible in so many ways. But my atheism is a product in certain ways of the schooling that I had in seminary. Because the risky thing about sending anybody to seminary is you're going to if you're going to send them to a place where there's a lot of just real basic learning going on, you're going to be exposed to new ideas. You're going to be challenged to ask hard questions and to pursue difficult questions, and nobody knows where that will lead. For most people, it leads to, pastoral life and that sort of thing. But for other people, it leads in another direction. But my professors taught me how to ask good questions, how to be skeptical, and how to be a critical thinker. And so the tool set that they gave me, it persists.
Yeah, I hear that. So, I mean, Christopher Hitchens, you brought him, you put the cat out of the bag. Give us a flavor of who this guy is. We're not sure what we're going to call this episode. Huzzah for Christopher Hitchens, or Hitchens the hero, or those.
Hitch your wagons to Hitchens.
Hitch your wagons to Hitchens. Give us a flavor of who he is. You sent a couple YouTube things my way. I've kind of known him like from afar a bit, but how did he noodle his way into your way of seeing the world?
Right. I'll get to, if I can get to that in just a second. Maybe I can do kind of like an expanded elevator pitch for him. So Christopher Hitchens died in 2011. I think he was around the age of 60, 62.
A young guy.
Yeah, he died at a somewhat young age of cancer, I believe. He was a lifelong smoker, and I think that had a lot to do with it. And he drank heavily too. But Hitchens was born in England, and he was educated at the top. Not born into privilege, I don't think, but he was educated at like the top schools. I think either Cambridge or Oxford, one of the two. But a wonderful education. That's so apparent when you listen to him. And then he became a journalist right out of the gate, and he was a journalist his entire life. He wrote for a variety of magazines. He started off pretty hardcore, like Marxist, Trotskyist, hardcore lefty. And towards the end of his life, I think a lot of that changed or softened. He actually was kind of criticized a lot for siding with the George Bush presidency on their policy on invading Iraq and stuff. He was a big supporter of that. So he took a lot of flack for that. But he was a free thinker. He wrote profusely, and he debated just a ton throughout his life. So, I mean, he was a very accomplished debater. And he moved to the United States, I think, sometime in the 70s or 80s. And then sometime in the early 2000s, I think he actually naturalized and was very proud of becoming an American. So, so that's kind of a rough background of Hitchens, a lifelong atheist, never recalls being a Christian, although he was raised in sort of a Christian environment in terms of going to Christian school and stuff. But as far as how I learned about him, there was a debate, like there was a film that was made called Collision, if I'm not mistaken. That was featuring Christopher Hitchens and Douglas Wilson, who is a Christian pastor, and it shows them sort of driving around town and then going into different debates and little clips of debates. A really well done film, and I had just seen little snippets of that for a few years, and then finally, when I started having some real serious questions, I remember digging into the Hitchens, Douglas Wilson, just one of the debates at, I think the school was called Westminster or something. And I watched that entire debate, and I was just blown away by his arguments and by the ways in which he made his arguments. He spoke to a lot of questions that I had always had, as well as not just the logic of what he said, but I think the sentiment that he was communicating. And it was a challenge for the Christian side to answer him, and I don't think that they did a good job answering him. And so it wasn't like I just was sitting around naively and I watched that video and bam, it changed my life. But there were a lot of things that were already spinning around in my head, and when I watched that, it made me go even deeper. And it wasn't too long after that I felt like I just didn't believe it anymore.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah. You sent me over a couple debates. I think that one of those ones from Westminster and a couple others, and between Hitchens and some Christian apologists. Honestly, it kind of took me back. There was a solid decade of my life, like in seminary and post-seminary, when I was beginning to pastor, when I was just devouring debates like these between usually theists and atheists, or there were some different versions or nuances of those. And now I'm somewhere in between those positions now. Like, I'm neither in alignment with the standard evangelical dogma. I'm not a fan of it. I think a lot of it's super gross. If you just go back to some of our podcasts, you'll see why I have scathing critiques of a lot of what's often called orthodox theology. But I'm also very frustrated with a lot of the atheistic dismissals of transcendence and the mystical. And I will get in a little bit of that here in a bit. But when I was listening to Hitchens in this debate, who he reminded me of, Trent, was, and we didn't have recordings of him, but he was also a journalist from England and super witty, G.K. Chesterton. And he's so quotable, and he's so pithy, and he's so clever in the way he communicates. I kind of see this, there's rotund Hitchens sitting there with his hair just kind of sitting back. He's kind of slouching. I see him kind of as that G.K. Chesterton, who was one of my favorite, kind of like when it comes to like quotables. G.K. Chesterton is right there. And he was, I think journalists, they just have, the good ones have this really beautiful knack of seeing things and then describing things. And so it doesn't surprise me that Hitchens had his background in journalism. But here's what I want to do. I want to dive into some of your favorite quotes. I got one that I'll do, but I'll let you go first. What are some favorite quotes or arguments from Hitchens?
Yes. Okay. Well, I want to quickly segue off of what you just said about his sort of likeness to G.K. Chesterton. And because I don't know, there's recordings of him. That was probably before there was some of that was available, but you can obviously read Chesterton, and every single line is entertaining. I mean, I would read it again this day because he wrote so compellingly. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the thing with Hitchens too, was this commitment, or he just couldn't help himself, to being entertaining, to not boring people, to have this sort of like religious commitment, if I can say it that way, to irony, which he described as the cream in the coffee, or the gin in the Campari, as he said. He wanted to always be humorous, and he shows up. I'll get to my quote in one second, but this is we may touch on this whole Frank Turk debate. But I would see debaters show up, and they'd have their suit and their tie and their hair slicked back, looking so put together. I'm like, you guys, that's not the right move. He's going to outflank you. He's going to upstage you. Don't do it like this, because the more seriously you take yourself, you're essentially dealing with a comedian here. Yeah, and he's not going to go easy on you. So, but anyway, so in a lot of his debates, there would be question and answer sessions, like most debates, and one of the threads that would continue appearing in these conversations would be people, more or less, I think rightly, asking him, Christopher, if you do not believe in an ultimate authority like God, what is the foundation for your morality? And that question always rankled him. And but one of his big responses to that was that just because you have a divine power, it doesn't solve your moral problems. Just look at the Bible and all the difficult things that have to be disentangled there. But there was a gal who was asking him a question, and so I'm going to read this quote. She said, what is your justification for persuading people to believe certain things? People were always saying, what's your justification? And he said this: only slightly better than saying they should listen to me because I'm doing God's will. Slightly, but measurably superior to that. And less arrogant, considerably less arrogant. And aesthetically more pleasing. And I just love that because it's like he's answering the question in probably the best way that he wants to and he can, but he's also doing it in such a way that's unforgettable, right?
Yeah.
Just to throw in aesthetically kind of a nod to Oscar Wilde or something, who would
Sure.
make the point that like it'd be better to have a good color sense than an understanding of right and wrong. But I just love how it brings humor into that situation.
Yeah, what's your justification? It's just like, I mean, because I'm doing God's will. How about because this is fun? It's slightly better, you know.
Yeah. So
I like that.
Anyway, I like that one. Yeah.
So that one
right.
debate you mentioned, what's his name? Turek?
Frank Turek. Yes.
Yeah.
Frank Turek.
He was I'm sure very intelligent, but very boring to listen to. And I'm just like, oh my God. Oh, why do so many these theologians take themselves so seriously and
I know.
And not see just the glaring bias of their perspective. Even the other one from Westminster is just like, yeah, I believe it because that's what I believe. You know, I believe these are miracles. Right? I'm just like, what? Yeah. So you have no critique of anyone because you clearly don't have any basis of reason for your arguments. Anyways, Hitchens was asked what the meaning of life was. So someone sent in Q&A, what's the meaning of life? And I love, he says, well, I can only answer for myself. And that's a point in and of itself. He didn't go off on this, but there's a point to be made there. I can only answer for myself. He's making the point of, like, my answer is not dogma. My answer is not something that expands into the meaning of other people's lives. You know, what's the meaning of life? He's giving an answer from the personal, which I find to be very compelling. He's not putting himself up to be a moral philosopher around ethics, even though he touches on those and talks about those things. He doesn't see that question in that realm. So I thought that was really interesting. I can only speak for myself. And then he said, and what cheers me up? and then he just gives the answer like gloating over the misfortunes of others. And everyone just kind of laughs. And he's just like, I don't know, like crowing over the miseries of others. It doesn't always work, but it never completely fails.
I just love it. I love it. Oh.
It doesn't always work, but it never completely fails.
He's just
and then
fucking with them, man. He
is.
With them.
He is. He's like the misfortune of others.
He's trolling them.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. And half of them laugh, and the other half are probably clutching their pearls, kind of thing. And then he says irony, and that's where he says like the cream and the coffee, and that's the irony. And then he says, and sex. You know, it can have diminishing returns, but it can be amazing.
Yes.
And then from there, he said, that's it. Then it's a clear run to the grave. And I thought it was clever and honest. And he clearly wasn't taking himself too seriously. And I think the point, if you peel back kind of his crudeness, if you peel back some of that, like just kind of showing up in a crude manner, he's basically just saying like, what are we talking about? The meaning of life. That presupposes a universal truth. Now, I tend to be connected to some of those ideas, but that is dogma, and you can't prove it. And people are constantly looking for stories to try and make sense of the universe and the world and their experience within the universe and the world. And he's saying, I'm actually not going to play that game. I'm not going to speak to your happiness. I'm not going to speak the happiness of others. I'm just going to speak to mine as the meaning of life. And I thought that was a kind of a bold thing for him to say. It certainly skirted the question in a way that questioned the question. So I found that I like it when people do that.
Yes. Yeah. And also he's not establishing some sort of dogma on the side of, let's say, atheism. This is how you must live your life, like every moment dedicated to intellectual rigor and all these kinds of things. So yeah, not much I can add. I thought it was a crowning achievement, that moment there.
All right, give us one more that you like.
Well, another one. This will be more of a paraphrase, but he would I've watched way too many of his debates. Literally, we're in the dozens and dozens of hours, probably over the 100-hour mark easily. I've gobbled him up. I probably should seek help, but he would highlight something, if you pay attention, is really clear in all these debates. He's arguing with people about whether or not there is a God. But you see, in my opinion, if people out there who are believers were just simply saying, I think or I believe that there is a God, some kind of entity, nobody would really be interested in the debates. But what they're actually wanting to argue for and posit is that there is a personal God who knows you and whom can be known, and who cares what you do. Like Hitchens would say, cares what you eat and on what day, who you sleep with and in what position, what prayers you say, what holy days you observe. He says, it could be that there's so much unity and grandeur and orderliness in the cosmos that maybe there is a power, although he says, I withhold belief in that, but it could be. He said, but if you want to go from there to establishing that there is a personal God, all of your work is still ahead of you. And in these debates, nobody tries to really make the case for that, for how exactly they can know that they've got a hotline to God, so that now that they're able to say, I can tell you with 100% certainty that these things are evil and these things are righteous because I just heard it from God. They can't really, I don't think they're at their best when Christian apologists are trying to make that point. I think there are other times in the debates where they might get the best of him and they make some very good points, but certainly not in that moment. I think that he really kind of closes that door on them.
Mm-hmm. He sees the Achilles heel there, and he goes after it. Yeah. Well, do you have any critiques that you would offer for Hitchens?
Yeah, I had to think long and hard for this one because I'm just such a fan.
That's fine.
Well, no, I do. I think that Christopher Hitchens, along with the other sort of 10, 15 years ago, they were known as the new atheists, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens. I think that all four of those guys are, and let me just speak specifically for Hitchens here. He was not a good Bible expositor. I mean, that just wasn't his domain, even though he had a great memory and he knew, for his part, quite a bit about the Bible. But I think that the problem was probably so many of his debates and so much of the dialogue inside his mind was directed towards those reading the Bible from a fundamentalist standpoint. And Joel, you and I know there's a rich and variegated tradition of interpretation starting thousands of years ago and moving to the present day. There are interesting things happening right now. Viable ways of reading scripture that are exciting and can lead to really interesting insights that are useful. And I think it's not great that, although I think that, like, for instance, Sam Harris and like Dawkins still want the Bible to be at the center of our education in terms of like it's the most important book in Western civilization. But it's one thing to say that, and it's another to sort of extol the many wonderful things in the Bible. Even if you didn't want to do any of it, the quality of the literature there is worth our serious attention. It's probably, I mean, it's up there with Shakespeare. It's probably more because it's had more of an impact. I wouldn't say it's better than Shakespeare, but you and I can look to many passages that are just beautifully written and can do things rhetorically that are astounding. And I think those sometimes get missed when we sort of just go to the easy knockdown passages, like God commanding the Israelites to go into Jericho and kill and destroy everything. I mean, that's low hanging fruit, but there's a lot of other stuff there that's not so easily sort of dismissible.
I concur immensely with you, because I also see that pattern in people like especially Dawkins, because he was just an asshole the way he kind of
He
talked
is. I
about that.
don't even really like him. Yeah.
I found his arguments not even to be and I'm not I will listen and lean into an atheist argument if it's a good one, but I found his like dismissal of it is, and also I saw this with Hitchens in some of these debates, it's just the straw man argument. I kind of
Right.
think about the who was it? He made the documentary Religulous. Bill Maher.
Bill Maher. Yeah.
And where he just talks about basically saying religion's terrible, and he interviews the worst versions of Christians,
Yes.
and I'm just like, what are we doing here? How this is just plain like bias. It's not this. You've lost all credibility in my eyes as someone who thinks an intellectual who can think critically by just throwing up. You're just trying to convince people that something is bad by showing them the abuses of that version. I think as Augustine, you can't judge philosophy by its abuse, and that was said 2,000 years ago almost. And here are these supposed intellectuals who are not arguing on par with the people. It's like, I would respect that atheist who go like, you know what, I actually don't know that much about the Bible in terms of interpreting it as sacred scripture. All I know is how to read it through my biased lens. So let's move this argument through to a different route. I would appreciate that to hear that instead of Hitchens just totally harping on the passage with the demons being put into the pigs who run off the cliff. And he doesn't even talk about it in a way it's like, that's not what that passage even means to me. And you're just building up a straw man, lighting on a fire, and say, and I'll go into I would love to hear your thoughts on this. My big criticism of Hitchens is this line he had multiple times is like, no thinking person could believe that. Yeah. And that to me is so arrogant and dismissive. Are there people who lack critical thinking skills? Yes. But that you can't split the world into you don't believe this, therefore you're not a thinking person, and you agree with me, therefore you are a thinking person. I believed very different things across the course of my life, and I have been a thinking person the whole time. There's more going on than my ability to think. There's experiences that expose me to ideas. There's my community that I want to stay within and experience. There's all kinds of trauma that impacts people. Like, if a certain belief logically determines, if there's a certain belief that I believe, and anyone who doesn't believe that I call unthinking, that tells me that I'm the one who's not thinking. I'm the one who's not considering that. So I see that as without nuance. It's kind of a dogma in and of itself, and just flat wrong in its assertiveness of how the brain works.
Yeah, I think that he didn't do himself any favors or his cause any favors by speaking that way. I think sometimes he crossed the line in ways that weren't helpful. Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
Well, what do you think of when he starts saying like no thinking person could believe that? What would be a better way for him to make his argument? As someone who loves him and appreciates his arguments, if you were like his PR guy, what would you say to Hitchens to help him say that better?
When he was saying it better, he would say things. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being hard hitting, but to say something like, because he would say something like this, which would be, why is it that you can look at any other religion? If you're a Christian, you can look at Islam, and you can see the so-called ridiculousness of certain things, that Muhammad took a night journey, on a horse. We don't have through the air, we don't have any evidence for these things other than a book said that it happened. So to say it like like that, like something I thought, let me just do a comparison where
Yeah.
someone's using humor that may not be quite palatable for everybody, but I don't think it's out of bounds. Sam Harris was talking about how, we're all told that we'll go to hell. Whoever doesn't believe in Jesus, whoever commits wicked deeds will go to hell. And he's like, there's no evidence for these things. It just says so in Mark 9 and Revelation 13. And, he throws out a few others. He says, and just as a point of reference, in the Lord of the Rings, it says that the elves, when they die, they can go to Valinor, but they can be reborn in Middle Earth. I say that just as a point of reference. So he says that. It's just like, I think that's so beautifully said, because he's saying, the point he's making is, because a book says something happened is not enough of a reason to believe it. It's not flat out a reason to disbelieve it, but you need to go a little bit deeper than that. That's better, I think, than saying no thinking person, because it's like, well, then you just, like, if I'm not on your side, I just stopped listening to you because you just insulted me. Yeah, nobody responds to that. That shuts everybody off immediately. Yeah. So, he didn't do well there.
And even there, I don't get offended. I'm just like, you don't know me. And what you're revealing to me is that you actually haven't gotten to know people like me. You haven't gotten to the, I think you told me that one of your professors said in seminary, and this really stuck with me when we were having our conversations back in the day, you were way more conservative than I was. And you told me, and it was a line that really stuck with me, to truly understand a position, you have to be able to empathize with it. Yes. And that's what I heard with Hitchens is just like, he hadn't taken the time to really understand and empathize with the people he was criticizing, to know that, hey, some of these positions are come to in very authentic and intellectual ways. You may disagree with it. Now argue with it on that level.
That's right.
And that's what it's just lazy. Just no thinking person would think that. It's like, well, if you grew up in an evangelical or a fundamentalist upbringing and you had two parents present, you would think very differently, Mr. Hitchens. That was not your experience growing up. So no wonder you don't see things that way. That would be why. It's not because he's a better thinker that he believes what he does. His story led him to that place to think in that way, which I'm grateful for. I got to hear his thoughts, but like, there's more going on than just a brain floating and thinking. That there's way more going on.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other critiques you have, or is that like basically the only critique you have?
No, that's kind of the main thing.
Okay. Well, I want to kind of like talk a little bit about my kind of views with atheistic intellectualism, tell a couple stories, and then just set you loose.
Sure.
Okay. Because I have some experiences that, even though I don't fully align with atheist intellectualism, I've had several people in my life who are atheist, and they would describe themselves as such, and they've sent me YouTube clips, or they've sent me different things, and I really want to express my gratitude that many of them have helped me in my goal of pursuing and seeking truth via intellectual honesty. I think two incidents of when I was still a pastor, even though my theology, I've always kind of been on the edge of whatever room I was in, whether it was my youth group or whether I was in college in my Greek class, or I was in seminary in various classrooms. I've always been the one that's kind of like going, are we really swallowing all of this? What about X, Y, and Z? And so when I was a pastor, even then, I would still feel like, okay, how do I like help this community, pastor them towards these Christian doctrines that were kind of our standard doctrines of faith? And I had a couple incidents. One was a guy named Tim Minchin. Do you know who he is?
Yes, I learned about him probably about 10 years ago. Yeah.
So I ran across him, like, I think I was watching Facebook videos or whatever, and it was like someone shared this video of him giving some graduate address, and it was really inspiring and beautiful, and it was so well done. And of course, he's sitting there looking all nice in his robe, and I was like, who's this guy? So I look him up, and you know, in every single performance he does, he's got like crazy makeup, his hair is crazy, and he's singing all these very crass and intentionally insulting songs all the time.
Yes,
Very
yes.
theatrical, fiercely sarcastic, and especially about religion and how God is a cunt. I think that's the title of one of his songs.
Yes, yes.
God is a cunt. And I remember being very disturbed by him, and the deep dive that I did, and the reason I was disturbed was because even still I could see the truth in his arguments. And I remember just being like, oh, I don't know what to do with this dissonance, because he is making very good points. And I remember there was a friend of mine who hadn't studied the Bible and theology like me, but I was just kind of reaching out to someone at the time because I was really struggling as a pastor. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy rocked me. Here's a close friend. I'm going to just kind of tell him about this. I showed him a friend and in place of vulnerability. And then he just kind of looked at me and said, almost in a dismissing way, well, don't you think that's just about him? He clearly doesn't know the truth, kind of thing. And he was basically saying to me, why are you so disturbed? He obviously isn't correct. And I just remember I hated that, and I chose not to talk about these kinds of things with him ever again, because I began to realize deep down, not everyone is really interested in pursuing truth. That's just not everyone's interest. That's my distinction between a thinking person and a person interested in pursuing truth. There are a lot of thinking people out there who really aren't interested in what's true.
Yeah, let me just sharpen it up a little bit if I can put in my 2 cents.
There's
almost nobody who's interested in pursuing truth. Most people, 99% of people, want to be spoon-fed. They're not interested in asking hard questions and following through with the consequences of that new truth that they've discovered. Most people aren't interested. Give me my TV programs, my football, my big box stores, and I'll just put it on autopilot from here. That's the vast majority of people. It's not easy to adjust your life to new discoveries and have an interest in new things because they can be very upsetting. It's easier to just be part of a nice little community and have everyone think that you believe the right things, don't stir the waters, get along, because community is very, very important. We need community. It's very difficult. So I sympathize with that. But there's just, the reality is, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, who knows, people are not inclined to ask hard questions and follow them through. Just don't have time for it.
Unless society already supports it.
Yes.
If society already, I mean, nowadays it's kind of there was a day to be a round earther was going against the mold. Nowadays it's like
right.
A flat earther is going against the mold, right? So I do think society already supports it, then we're good. But like, I find myself, a lot of people find out that I was a pastor and they automatically think that I believe X, Y, and Z. And it's so hard for me just to keep my mouth shut and to go like, actually, I don't agree with you. I don't see things the same way you see things in almost everything you think Christians believe. And that's really hard for me. I mean, let me give you one other incident. So the Christian apologist William Lane Craig, right?
Yes.
So this is back in the day when I was watching these debates, and he was arguing. I don't remember the debate. I don't remember the scientist who's on the other side. It was just one of the many I had listened to, and these things are like hour and a half, 2 hours long, so they're kind of pretty boring, a lot of them.
Right.
But they're arguing about the cosmos. I don't know if it was about the Big Bang or if there's a creator. I don't remember what it was, but I feel like the other scientists kicked his ass in that debate. It was not even close. William Lane Craig, who's a philosopher, not a scientist, picked some weird little argument based upon it felt like a footnote from some physicist paper, and then he just pointed and kept bringing that back up over and over again in like classical Lincoln Douglas style debating.
Yes, right.
And it was just like, you idiot, will you engage this guy instead? Like, that's why I'm listening.
Yes.
I don't want to hear your classical training right now. I want to hear what reason and logic can do in the face of his very compelling arguments. And at the end, the scientist, you could hear it in his voice. You could tell he was smiling, and he says, "This is what I do at the end of all these debates." And he basically just says, "Hey guys, we're all really trying hard here." And he gave this sense of there's a lot of us that are, we're doing our best, and why don't we just all at the end of the day just kind of honor and respect each other, and what if we all just strove to get along? And it was like infinitely more loving and caring and pastoral than all of the debate of William Lane Craig put together. And I listened to that thing, and here I am, a pastor of a community, and I completely I feel disdain for this celebrated Christian apologist arguments, and I'm attracted to the completely non-religious, non-spiritual, atheistic perspective and heart ethos of this scientist, and that rocked me. I don't know, what are your thoughts about that incident?
I think I've had similar experiences. I think that maybe in a way what you're describing is kind of a person who is trying to just win a debate, or make himself look good, or whatever's going on. But what we're trying to do here together is we're trying to exchange ideas and learn from each other. And we call it a debate, but discussion, conversation, that's what we're trying to do. And I think that why, like, Hitchens was so attractive to me was that he was very firm about his sort of expectation that people would think critically about things. But I don't think on a lot of issues he was super dogmatic about, you need to behave this kind of way. And I think that's what he was keen in on in a lot of these debates. He's saying, listen, I wouldn't be up here doing this if the outcome of these debates meant that, like, if the fundamentalist Christians won, it meant that then they got to have power over me in the only world we know for sure exists, is what he used to say. So if you get to any discussion that we have, and you get to point to the Bible and say, you lose, boy chap, because I've got God on my side, and then as a result of that, I get to tell you how to live your life and everybody that you know, the stakes are a little bit high there. And I appreciate him making that stand, being strong there, and saying, we're done with, like he called it, theocratic bullying. Yeah. If you're going to make an argument for how people ought to behave morally and legally, you better do better. You better do better than the Bible tells me so.
I know.
I'm sorry. It's just that's
lame.
Not an adult way of interacting. It might be a way of getting kids to behave because it's simple, and maybe they respond well to intimidation. But it's not an adult way of arguing. I don't think that means that we don't have recourse to Scripture, but I think, Joel, it would look something like this. We would go to, let's say, a Pauline letter like 1 Corinthians or Romans, and we would engage with it and say, what do you make of the argument here? Well, it's beautifully stated here, and this is compelling, or this is ugliness right here, or this doesn't do much for me, or I think he's just dead wrong, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. You cannot do that if you are a hardcore fundamentalist. You're just not allowed to approach the Bible that way. But I think we can still have recourse to biblical teaching, but it's an ongoing discussion. It doesn't stop. There's no loud voice or fist on the table that says the discussion's over. We keep it going, and that's the exciting part. I think that's what you and I what excites us about, like, doing this podcast. It's the discussion is ongoing. It becomes sort of an organism, this discussion, and that is the exciting part. Not I have the little coup de grace that shuts the debate down, and we can go home and everybody can see how fucking smart I am.
Yeah. And I just want to express my gratitude to people like Hitchens and what the arguments
Yeah.
you're kind of saying, because even though I've kind of found my own path that has I call it transcend and include. I've transcended the dogma that I've been taught, but I've included the parts of it that I find
Right.
to can still be helpful, the things that I still fit into this bucket of truth that I'm pursuing so rigorously. But these atheistic intellectuals have helped me let go of the parts of Christianity that my ego didn't know how to let go of. Things like first, inerrancy, like how this tying me to the Bible in a certain way. Think about 1 Corinthians and Romans. You brought up Pauline epistles. These are written to certain people for a specific situation. Why does this mean universal truth? Paul did not, if he wrote, not all those letters, and it's debatable that they were all written by him. But if he did not imagine a world 2,000 years later, ordering the universe and God's character based upon a couple, chapters that he wrote to a specific church about a specific situation. Like, why are we doing that? That's still within the framework of evangelical interpretation, and it blows all that theology out of the water. And then these atheistic intellectuals help me let go, like denying I was taught to deny the experience of gay Christians, and these atheistic intellectuals helped me love them better than all the Christians put together that influenced me. And that says something remarkable. It took atheist intellectuals to help me love better. And that is a strong statement. And I mean that in the most searing, critical, yet also kind of compassionate. I get where you guys come from, but your views aren't loving if you are like dismissing all these proclaimed Christians' experiences of their own sexuality. And then it just kind of blows the water out of what's called orthodoxy. That's the book by G.K. Chesterton, right? Orthodoxy. Yeah. I don't believe there's such a thing as orthodoxy. I think there are views and beliefs. I think there are orthodoxies, plural. If you look at Christian history, there's a lot of different versions of them. And so I would say my gratitude goes to atheistic intellectuals for helping me get there. And I say all that to ask you and tee you up. In your view, what is the value of atheistic intellectualism in our society today?
When I was in high school, I think it was my junior year, I had AP psychology, and Dr. Wood, he was one of the best teachers I've ever had. And the textbook that he assigned to us, like the opening page said, it said this phrase. I don't know what the context was, but the phrase was maintain a spirit of open-minded skepticism. And I loved that, because what that means is I'm not going to close off to anything prematurely, but I'm going to be skeptical of everything that comes my way, because it probably isn't healthy or productive just simply believe something because somebody says it. We should engage with it. We should do business with it. And so I think that's one of the virtues of what you call atheistic intellectualism, is that open-minded skepticism. And I would say this too. I would encourage everybody. This is the third wall here. I would encourage everybody out there that if you are a Christian, recognize that you are also an atheist. Yes, it's true. You are an atheist with regards to God Jupiter, Zeno, Zeus, Hera, what am I missing?
Zoroaster.
Zoro. Yeah, that's right. The monkey god, Hanuman, Ganesh, the remover of obstacles.
Man, I love Ganesh.
If you don't believe these gods, you are an atheist with respect to those gods. Christopher Hitchens was quoting somebody else when he said, comically, we started in polytheism with many gods, then monotheism got it down to one. They're getting near the truth all the time. So I mean, you may not agree with that, but recognize
I
that.
absolutely agree with that.
Whereas,
Yeah.
no, I'm talking about like the people out there, like recognize when. Not talking to you. When I'm back in the third wall, when you look skeptically at, let's say, Islam or Mormonism, and you're atheistic towards those, they're atheistic towards your religion. And I, as an atheist, just simply haven't found one yet that I believe. That's not, it could happen tomorrow. Tomorrow, I become open to it, or there's a new religion out there that's more compelling. But everybody is more in camaraderie with me than they would care to admit. It's just with their own stuff, they don't ask the same kinds of questions.
Yep. You know, one thing that I love that skepticism, because it's taken me a while to realize that I'm naturally a very skeptical person. And
yeah,
you and I both went to a undergraduate at a charismatic university, and the main word that they love to talk about is faith.
Yes.
And I don't know, was it your experience? Like, I constantly, regularly felt like, oh, I don't have enough faith.
Yes.
In the
Faith
truth
was like
it
was like a power that you wielded, like a Jedi power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are the droids they're looking for, and that was faith. I don't. What I learned over time was that what I thought was my lack of faith was the fact that I had higher critical thinking skills, and was willing to like go, wait a second, you said this and then this, and they don't align. What's your explanation? And then they hear just really stupid dogmatic kind of explanations, and then finding that there was, like, as you said, 95% of the people are like, yep, that makes sense. And then there are 5% of us going like, wait, do you believe that too? It was just, and as I've gotten older, and I feel like when I look back on like that like raveling of what was, I thought, the loss of my faith was actually, I'm a deep believer. I'm a deep believer, but my belief does not still holds up in the face of a lot of skepticism. And because I've learned that just because there's something I don't agree with or I don't see the same way, I'm not against it. Like, I'm not against Mormonism. I'm not against Islam.
Yeah.
I'm not against these things. I am against violence and harm, and those can show up in basically any belief system. You can be a Christian, Muslim, Mormon. If you're hurting people, I'm against that behavior. Like, I will make that claim and be against that. But I'm not against a system of beliefs, because a system of beliefs that doesn't threaten me or hurt anyone in and of itself.
And Joel, you just prompted me to say this, like, we both read Walter Brueggemann, right? And I think one of the things he alerted me to, which makes reading the Old Testament more exciting, was this concept, Israel, meaning like the one who wrestles with God, right? And he really elaborates on that and unpacks that idea that's huge in the Old Testament of the people of God wrestling with God, struggling with him. And I would say where you are is a result of enormous, painful, but also sometimes exciting struggle. Yeah. And so I have respect for that. And my ask, my invitation, or my request would be from my Christian brothers and sisters out there is, whatever you might think about where I landed, I hope that you could also see that I am where I am because of a great struggle of this desire to know the truth and to be in alignment with that. And I didn't land, at least not now, I didn't land in the camp of Christianity, but I think we should all respect that if somebody has a great struggle with something, they've done business with it, and they've spent time thinking about it and having conversations with people, that's respectable. That's good. That's what we want. I am terrified. And I know I can tell you countless stories. I'm sure you can too. The people that scare me the most and the people who do the worst things in this world, doesn't matter if they're Christian or Muslim or whatever, the people that are the unthinking, non-open-minded fundamentalists who know exactly what the future needs to look like and exactly what you need to be doing right now. I run from those people, and I try to shelter my loved ones from them as well, because they do great harm. That is not the place to be. We can have discussion with people who are interested in learning and can understand sort of the terms and the ethos of a debate. But if you don't have that, boy, that is the rot of a culture, in my opinion.
I think that is the seed and teaser for some future podcasts. I had multiple conversations that went off in my head as you were unleashing that. Thank you, Trent, for your passion.
Buddy.
Friends, thank you for joining with us on this conversation about Christopher Hitchens, atheistic intellectualism. Any final thoughts, T-Dog?
No. Say, keep on reading, everybody. Keep on reading, keep on thinking, keep on talking. Don't stop doing it. Don't stop doing it. And make sure you keep interacting with us on YouTube channel, Lead Balloons, at leadballoonspod.com. Email us at leadballoonspodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Apple and Spotify and iHeartRadio as well. So go find us. Go interact with us and search out old episodes and stay current with us. And check out our blogs on our website as well.
Sounds good. All right, thank you guys for joining us for Lead Balloons Podcast, The Alchemy of Unpopular Opinions. Until next time.
Nice.